Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of this Java Swing tutorial where we're looking at how to create a GUI-based tic-tac-toe game. In tutorial 1, we looked at how to construct a new game frame, and that means we're going to design our own class to design a game frame. To help us out, we're building our idea on top of an existing framework, if you like, which is the JFrame class. So we're using all of the useful functions and methods in this class, such as set title, set default, close operator. These are all useful methods in the JFrame class that I can use in my class. And in my class, I'm creating specific things related to tic-tac-toe. Okay, so this is kind of building on top of a JFrame. Also, when I click buttons, I want to implement the action listener class. And when I do that, all it's asking me to do is make sure that I code or implement this method here, the action performed method. Okay, so by the time we reach the end of part 1, basically we came up with the layout, the look and the feel of our tic-tac-toe game, and today we're going to look at what happens when we click buttons. Okay, so when we click a button, we call the action performed a method, and we send it a reference to the button that we clicked. That's what this thing is here. Okay, so when we click a button, the reference goes into the action performed method. So let's start the logic for this method. The first thing we want to do is grab the button that was clicked. Now it is a J button. I'm going to call it clicked button. And I'm going to grab the source of that variable E. Grab that. What is it? Is it a button? What happened? Okay. And apparently I have to cast it to be a J button. I don't really know why I have to do that, but I have to do it, so I'm going to do it. Now we need to determine which button this is in our buttons array. Which button was clicked? So let's find out. We'll loop through, use a for loop, to I is less than 9. We could say buttons.length, it's the same thing. Now if this clicked button is the same as the current button that the for loop is processing in the buttons array, and that button has some text which is the same as an empty string, it means we've clicked a button that hasn't been clicked yet. Does that make sense? If we run our code again, here's a button with an empty string. There's nothing there. And when I click it, I want to put the current player. And I want to disable that button so we can't click it again. So if we find a button that hasn't been used yet, let's update text to be the current player, and let's disable that button. Now look at all these useful functions that I can use in my program. I can use these functions because I'm using J buttons in my game. These are just pure J buttons, and I have imported the JButton class from the Java Swing library into my program. So I'm allowed to use all of these amazing JButton functions or methods. This is saving me time in my game development. Very, very useful to use library files. So what we're going to do, after a button has been clicked, we need to find out if there's been a winner yet. So I'm going to create a function called checkWin, and that function is going to return a result. And the data type of that result is going to be a Boolean. It's going to tell me if there's a win or there's not a win. I also need to check if there is a tie. So again, I'm going to create a function called checkTie to help me do that. Now logically, if win is true, now remember, win is a Boolean variable. It's Boolean anyway. If is expecting a Boolean result inside these brackets, win is Boolean. We don't really need to say, we don't need to compare it with true. Up to you if you want to do that. We can just say if win. So if there is a win, we want a little dialog box to pop up and tell us who the winner is. So we're going to create something called a JOption pane, and we're going to show a message dialog, which will display, not in the click button, it's going to display in this JOption pane, the message similar syntax to system.out.print. Okay, so if there's a winner, we're going to display the winner. Else, if there's a tie, if this variable here gets a true when we call this function, if there's a tie, we're just going to display another message saying that there's a tie. So let's just copy that, paste it in, and we're just going to say, it's a tie. Else, the final thing here is, if it's not a win, if that's not true, and that's not true, it means we just keep playing the game. So we need to flip the player. Okay? And that's really all that our action performed event does. It finds out which button was clicked. If it hasn't been used, it sets the text to current player, disables the button, and then calls some functions. Now, just to see if these two things work, I'm just going to comment out all of this code, because that's going to give me an error, because I haven't designed some of those functions yet. Let's just test this bit of code. See if it works. Current player, current player, current player, current player, current player, and you see they're being disabled, so I cannot click them again. Perfect, it works. Notice that I'm not flipping the player yet. I haven't coded that yet. Okay, let's code a couple of these functions to end part 2, and then we'll look at some final logic in part 3 of this video series. So let's find the end of the action performed method. There it is. Now let's create another method, which is the checkWin method. The checkWin method returns a Boolean. So let's make sure we put in that return type. Notice these are not static methods. We're not saying public static Boolean. The reason is the only way we can call this method is by constructing a game frame object. If we don't have a game frame object, we cannot call any of these methods. These are not static methods. They are directly related to an object. Now, don't panic if that doesn't make sense at the moment. You might figure that out with the more experience you get of coding in Java. So when we check win, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if there's a row winner. And so we're going to call a function to help us do that. And let's also check if there's a column winner. So we'll make another helper function, just to help us, or a method. I should be using the word method, shouldn't I? And to see if we've got a column winner. And we would want to check if there's a diagonal winner too. Now, if we have a row winner, or we have a column winner, or we have a diagonal winner, If any of those is true, they're all Booleans, that means that the check win function will return true. Else, we've done all the checking, we didn't return true, so we're going to return false. There is no winner yet. Okay, so when we call that function, if it returns true, that means this code here will be executed. If it returns false, we'll jump into to check if it's a tie. Okay, so let's code that function as well before we finish today. Public Boolean check tie. And I think this is the last function that we'll look at in this video. All we're going to do for checking tie is we're going to loop through our buttons array. And we're going to see if there is still a button with empty text in it. Because if it is, it means it's not a tie. There's still a button to be clicked. So let's get the text of a button. Let's see if it is the same as an empty string. That means it hasn't been clicked yet. And if that's true, we want to say, okay, it's not a tie yet, so we're going to return false. We'll get out of this function and we'll return false. It's not a tie. We still have. When the for loop has finished processing all of the buttons, if it didn't return false yet, then it's going to return true. We didn't find a blank button. That means it's a tie. Okay? So hopefully that logic makes sense for the check win and the check tie methods. In our last video in the series, we'll look at the logic of these check rows, check calls, and check diag functions, and we'll also look at how to flip the player.